Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining this continuing study of Hebrew words as we're going through the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 15, picking up on the 12th verse today. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you will see we're using Bible Hub. And again, just so glad to have all of these tools handy for us that we don't, in addition to having books and other literature, we can easily use the Bible Hub here, and it's just a real blessing. And so, hopefully, encourage you to investigate that a little bit, just surf around here, and to look at just the great understanding we can get from God's Word with all the tools that God has given unto us. So we pick up at verse 12, and again, the whole scenario here from just a recap of before is God had given Saul a mission, and Saul went out to take care of this mission to uh, perform God's will, which was to eliminate the Amalekites. And so he's coming back, and just watching the thought process here of what Saul is thinking, what Samuel is thinking, as Samuel's thoughts reflect God's will, but Saul's thoughts do not. And so the battle's over, army's coming back, and it says that Samuel rose to meet Saul in the morning and was told Samuel um, saying that Saul is coming to Carmel and indeed set up for himself a monument. Um, this is very, very interesting. First of all, um, it gives you an indication of Saul's mentality, that here I'm going to just use the cliche, he's so full of himself that he sets up a monument for himself to commemorate this great battle that God had told him to fight. You begin to see where Saul's at and what power and position and authority causes just a corruption in him. What is interesting to note is that in the land of Israel, when you go to visit it, you will not see any monuments to any people. The Israelites are very, very keen on observing what they feel is an observance of the commandment of thou shalt not have any graven images. And so when you go to Israel, you will not see any monuments to any past presidents, any spiritual leaders, any great military figures. There are none of these monuments in Israel. And again, I kind of we'll take that into thought as, of course, in our country there has been discussions and dissension, I would say, over monuments to certain figures, and some have been torn down, some have been defaced, others have been put up because of a remembrance. And I look at this and compare that to um, the approach that Israel takes in not having any monuments to commemorate any person or anyone who has done anything, that they'd put up a monument for them. And just food for thought. And so we see here that Saul puts up a monument for himself. Now, this word monument is what caught my attention. It is the word yad. It's the yod, the comets, and then of course the dalet here, but it's normally the word for hand. And so when we just kind of click on the concordance to take a look at it, it comes up as hand. Of course, hand here has been translated into many different words in English. The most prominent is hand at 859, hands at 303, but you see many, many words are attributed and translated in this word hand. And here we get to memorial and monument. It's three words that are put into this. And so you have to read into the thought process of how does you get monument out of this word for hand? Obviously, as he would say, he set up for himself a hand. It doesn't make much sense. But when you think of it as the works of your hand or as something that you create to commemorate yourself, it's something that you have put your hand to do. And you start thinking of these uses of, in English, what we attribute to the work of man's hands, or he put his hands to do this. In Hebrew, it attributes to the very similar thing. And so this was something that Saul's hands had put up for his own hand, his own use to commemorate him. And so, again, very interesting to see where Saul is going here. We see it's not good. We see it's not good. And so, we get to verse 13, and we see this confrontation is about to happen here where Samuel and Saul get together. And it's just very interesting to look at the verbiage that Saul uses when he comes to Samuel. He comes to him, and I'm going to obviously what you're seeing here on the screen is the Hebrew, which reads from right to left, and I'm going to be reading out of the what's called a JPS, Jewish Publication Society, and their Socino edition. It says, "And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Um, you can almost hear the sarcasm and the maybe not sarcasm, but the buttering up, if you will, and the essence of what Saul is feeling here and what his character is like. That he comes back in this very grandiose means, and he's going, "Oh yes, here I am, the great Saul. I did what God had done, and you know." You are blessed, Samuel, and just almost ad nauseum the verbiage that's being used here. And so we look at it in the Hebrew, and Saul, it says, "Lo Shaul Baruch atah la Yahweh Hakimot et Daver." Now, what's interesting here is you see the word Yahweh being used, and you see the word Devar, Daver, being used here, depending upon if you're pronouncing it in biblical Hebrew or modern Hebrew. I prefer to stay with the modern Hebrew, which is somewhat different than what you see phonetically spelled out in the Bible Hub. But he's using the compassionate, merciful name of God. So he's implying that he has this relationship, and it says commandment of the Lord. It uses the word devar, which are really the words from the heart. So Saul is saying, look at the good thing that I've done. I have this tight relationship with God. I can call him by his merciful name, and even the name that the Jews won't even pronounce today. And I'm doing the heartfelt desires, the will of Yahweh. And he thinks he's doing this, and it's just like, whoa, where is he at? I want to take and look at this word for I performed. It's H6965. And we get the word kum, which means arise and to stand. You'll remember when Jesus raised the little girl from the dead in the New Testament, that the words are retained, and he says, kumi tabita, rise. And so it's the same word in Hebrew as it is in Aramaic. And so it's this word arise. So how does arise fit in with I have performed? Again, you just see this grandiose methodology that is going through the mind of Saul, that he thinks so highly of himself that he's just risen and exalted in himself. And he, translating it into "I have performed." And so, again, very sad state of affairs. And of course, his bubble is about to be burst here in verse 14. That, here's this whole procession taking place. Saul is with his armies. The people are following behind him. You know, uh, obviously, we're going to find out that there's sheep and cattle. King Agag is there in the procession, but it's a very grandiose thing. It's like marching down, um, you know, Central Park or the main thoroughfare in New York City and having a ticker tape parade and showing off the military might and the conquest. That's what's happening here. This whole procession is coming through, and Saul is the leader. He is the king, and but then, verse 14. Samuel says, "Whoa, stop the show, stop the procession, you know, put the brakes on here." Um, Samuel says, what do I hear? I hear the bleating of sheep. I hear the sound that the cows and the oxen make. And Saul immediately goes into defense mode here. And he starts trying to justify himself. And Saul says, well, the Amalekites, and um, this is the stuff that we spared, and it was the people who did it. They spared the best of the oxen and of the sheep because we're going to sacrifice to Yahweh, your God. He's not even calling him his God, but all the stuff that wasn't so good, that I destroyed. This is just, if you look at what's happening here, and it doesn't take much imagination to put it in maybe some things that happen in a modern context, in with leaders, is that how they yield to peer pressure, how they yield to what the people want, that they don't stand up in their own integrity, and then they make decisions, and then when they're called to the task for it, to give an explanation, they say, well, I didn't mean for it to happen. The people did it. I just gave in to the will of the people, what they wanted to do. When in reality, normally they are the ones that are instigating it and propagating it and using the people as just a scapegoat, as a means to justify what poor decisions they have made, and that they couldn't make their own decisions. And here we see that happening with Saul and the people. And he blames the people. He throws them under the bus, basically, and he does this blame game. He deflected responsibility and says that, well, we meant it for good. It wasn't exactly what God wanted, but we meant it for good. And again, look at the verbiage in verse 16 where Samuel says to him, shut up, shut up and listen, basically. And uh, hear what God is going to say to you. And what's kind of interesting here, we're going to look up the word um, for be quiet. It's 7503 in the JPS commentary. He's saying stay is what they translate it. So you got stay, you got be quiet. You kind of get the feel here a little bit. But let's look at the word rafa that it comes from, and it's saying to sink or to relax. So what Samuel is trying to do here is change the whole mood of the situation from one that's joyous and kind of raucous and celebratory, and he's saying, stop, just stop it. Just stop it all. Let's sink down into the reality of what really happened here. Let's dissuade all of these emotions that you're feeling and just stop, and will you be quiet and listen. And again, what a confrontation that must have been, and just incredible. And so Saul is listening, and Samuel says, be quiet and I will tell you what the Lord, what Yahweh said to me. You'll notice that the word for these words that he's about to relay to Saul uses the word diver. De Bear here. De Bear, it's 1696. And of course, these are words from God's heart. And what causes me notice here is this is in a PL form. And the PL in Hebrew implies an intensiveness, a strength, pay attention to these. These are really important. These are like words that are spoken on a deathbed of a loved one who's about to give his last breath and about to say things that are extremely, extremely meaningful. And so this is the mood that Samuel is creating, saying, these are the words that I heard from Yahweh as he spoke to me last night. Again, how God speaks to the prophet, telling him the things to say in advance of it taking place. So this wasn't where he got his words just, prophetically on the spur of the moment. He knew what was happening before Saul ever returned. He knew what had happened, and the Lord had revealed it to him. And that is such a beautiful, beautiful thought here as we begin to see what is about to happen. And Saul is still kind of in this denial mode, still bringing a haughty spirit that seems to be evident because he just says, "All right, tell me, speak on." And again, it's in a when you see that at the end of verse 16, it is also in a PL form. So just as strongly as Samuel is confronting Saul with, here are the words of the Lord, it almost seems like Saul is responding in almost as strong as an emphatic manner of reply, saying, "Speak on." Speak those words from your heart. Here I am. I'm going to hear it. Again, not a humbling spirit that I detect in these words here. It, to me, betrays a very haughty spirit where he's almost defiant, saying, "Well, what are you going to tell me? I'm the king. I just conquered. I did this. The people are in support of me. Everything's going my way. What are you going to say? What is God going to say? What is anybody going to say to me?" And so, with that, we're going to end our session today. Again, very strong thoughts, very strong words, um, very strong personalities going on here. And again, as we study God's Word, what's our main purpose? Not just to learn about what these guys did, but to also see that they are human as we are human, and how easily positions and power and um, those things of the world can corrupt us and create in us, as it created in them, an attitude that is somewhat blind, that hearts can be hardened, and that we lose our sensitivity to what God's will really is, and we forget that we are nothing. We forget that we are just dust created in his image, and if we have anything worthwhile in our lives, it is only because God has supplied it, and we need him. And everything has come from him, and as easily as he has given it to us, it can be easily taken away. And we want to fulfill, as I try to say at the end of every lesson, the Vahavta, which is Deuteronomy 6:4 through I believe 9, where and the Vahavta is, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength." And that's my endeavor. That's my journey as I share that with you, and pray that you enjoy the study of God's Word, and that can become your goal also for this week. So God bless you, and have a wonderful week.